I ask you and thank you for being present in this place. I don't ask you. You are already here. So, Lord, as we look at your word, as we look at the people that you chose to exemplify what it means to be in relationship with you, that our hearts would be opened, that our spirits would be ready, and that you would pour into us today. In your precious name, amen. We've spent this quarter looking at the life of Abram turned Abraham and his relationship with a God who's defining himself through Abraham and his family. I hope it's been made evident how like you and I, Abraham was. Over and over, God makes covenants and promises and reiterates them again and again with this man who still, just like us, repeatedly struggles with trust and belief. So yes, Abraham was a human, not an infallible picture of trust, but rather a man with similar doubts and concerns about God that we too struggle with today. What I'd like to look at today is what it actually means to trust God. I don't know about you, but I've struggled with trust. And this is where we find ourselves in Abraham's story, with a man who is time after time after time being asked, "Will you trust me?" by God, who is defining himself to humanity. As a quick reminder, let's look back at God's conversations with Abraham as reimagined by me. So again, this is God speaking to Abraham. Abram, leave everything you've ever known. Go off on your own. Will you trust me? Abram, I'm promising you this land with a covenant that all I'm asking for in return is, will you trust me? Abram, I know you want a kid. I want you to have a kid. Will you trust me? Abram, dude, remember how I promised you a kid and so much more? And instead of trusting me, you went and instead trusted your wife and your own instinct and slept with your wife's servant girl and had a kid? Dude, I still want you to have a kid with your wife. Will you trust me? Bro, Abe, my man. Okay, so clearly we're still having trust issues. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to make another covenant with you. This time, I need you to circumcise yourself and all the men in your camp. This is a medical university. I know what you all know about this stuff. Yes, I know you're 99 years old. Yes, I know I haven't created anesthesia to help. Yes, I know I haven't hit the Iron Age yet, so there are no knives or swords, just sharp rocks. I know it will hurt. But this is your reminder that you and your people are mine, and I am here to care for you. And I'll bless you through this child I continue to promise you and Sarai. Oh, and bro, new name for your wife. And you. You are now Abraham, meaning father of many, and her name is Sarah, meaning princess. Will you trust me? Abraham, my man, look what I did. It's a year later. You've got your boy. Your wife laughed. You laughed. This boy will bring you laughter, so name him Isaac, because it means he laughs. May he always remind you of the covenants and promises I have made you, and may you laugh with joy when you think about all I've blessed you with. Do you trust me? We now come to our text for today, a gruesome, disturbing story. It is believed Abraham is 115 to 130 years old, and Isaac, his son, is somewhere between 12 and 35 years old. Please keep this in mind as I read this text out of Genesis 22. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham," and he said, "Here I am." God said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." It doesn't say it in the text, but is this not a huge "do you trust me" moment? This is even deeper than that, isn't it, with Abraham? Do you trust me, Abraham, even if you don't get what you want? I mean, isn't that what's being asked here? God has promised and promised and promised Abraham a son. Abraham has this son God has promised, and now Abraham is being asked to kill his son. This is insane, right? Verse 3. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, 12 to 35 years old. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife, so they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." Are you seeing something similar between God and Abraham and now his son and God, or his son and him? He said, "Behold, the fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So they went both of them together. And when they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. Okay, stop. Does anyone have a problem with the God described here? Without any other context, is anyone A-okay with what's going on? Yeah, it's no big deal, right? No, because I'm not. And while the story isn't over yet, I hope it's evident that this was a terrifying time to be alive. As a parent, hey, as a human, this is sick. So horrifying, so utterly sickening. It's difficult to read it. But if I was hearing this story 3,500 years ago, I can imagine I'd perceive this story differently. This was the culture of the time. The disturbingly terrible culture of the time. It was believed that to survive in life, you had to appease the gods. To grow food, to have water, all that is necessary to sustain life, you needed sun and rain. But just the right amount of sun and rain. And who controls the sun and rain? Well, the gods. So how do you request sun and rain? You give to the gods. What do you do once you've received the sun and rain needed? You thank the gods. What did you do when you didn't receive enough sun and rain? You gave the gods more. The culture of the day would start by giving us or sacrificing the best of what they had: sheep, goats, etc. If that didn't work, they'd give more sheep and goats. If that didn't work, you'd give more humans, servants, daughters, etc. And if that didn't work, you'd give your most valuable thing, your firstborn son. These early religions had built-in anxiety because no matter what you did, you were never sure if it was enough for the gods. I'm going to invite some people up. Pastor Dillis shared that my daughter is sick, so she's not at school today. Yes, she's 3.5. Yes, she's in school. We can talk about that later. But I was hoping they would come up as I talk about them. So, my wife and I have this almost 4-year-old who's evidently barefoot. It's totally normal when you're 3.5. And she is a feisty, intelligent, beautiful, strong-willed, just like her father, 4-year-old. In less than 1 month, we'll have our second baby girl joining us. Actually, literally any day now, potentially. And these 3 women make up my most inner circle. They are my world. And one of them I haven't even met, but I'm already so deeply in love with her. What's her name?
Poppy.
Poppy. Her nickname is Poppy. Thank goodness we no longer practice sacrificial offerings. I cannot fathom being asked by this God who's told me to trust him by killing this. Thank you, guys. This is disturbing in 2017. But during Abraham's lifetime, the story was headed in a very predictable direction. If I was hearing this story back then, and this is exactly what I would expect. This is how the story should go. Abraham was asked to give all that he had to the gods. And if Abraham killed his son, God would show him favor. Yet, what happens next was completely out of the norm. Verse 11. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, what did he say? Any guesses? What has everyone else replied? Here I am. He said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his thorns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you. And I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars in heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your offspring shall all nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba. The script was flipped. This is a story about a God who says, do you trust me? And this God didn't want death or to sacrifice us for him to love us or to answer our prayers. This was one of the first stories where God stops a human sacrifice. This God didn't need to be appeased in the traditional manner. This God only wanted Abraham's trust. This God wanted to give and give and give and pour out and bless in abundance. He wanted humanity to understand that their allegiance to the other gods was foolish. That this one true God was different, and in the most incredible way. Ways that were mind-bendingly shocking at the time. Friends, this is not just the God of Abraham and Isaac from 3,500 years ago. He is the God of now and continues to make promises to you and I even today. This God, even this morning, asks each of us, will you trust me? Especially when you don't get what you want. So, will you? Will you trust him when you're in the midst of school and you have to repeat a class or an entire year? Will you trust him when you believe you've given all you have and honestly you're still alone, waiting for that someone to join you in life? Will you trust him when you've tried and tried and tried, but you're unable to have the baby you've been dreaming of forever? Will you trust him when all hope is lost and there doesn't seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel? I'll be totally honest with you guys. I haven't experienced this kind of test of my trust yet. I haven't been brought to the edge of all I know, especially after having been promised it and dreamed of it and yearned for it and received it, only to give it back completely. However, I have been an eyewitness to an incredible demonstration of it. Just a few weeks ago, we passed the 3rd anniversary of one of the hardest experiences I or my family has ever been a part of. On an early Saturday morning in November of 2014, I received a phone call. It was around 1 a.m. and from a very close friend. The friend and I had both gotten home around 11 p.m. after rehearsing right up here on this stage in this very sanctuary the evening before. Because of my Do Not Disturb feature on my iPhone, he had to call me 3 times before he got through. And all he said was, "My wife stopped breathing. Can you meet me at the hospital?" Immediately, my wife and I, along with our daughter, Elliot, who was then 8 months old, rushed to the Loma University emergency department. About an hour later, I watched 4 emergency department doctors walk down the hallway to the room where we were in to share that his wife could not be revived. I learned that night, when that many people come to a room, it's bad news. However, as she was 6 months pregnant, they had done an emergency C-section and they had managed to save this ultra-preemie baby. It's so personal to be with someone when they get that news. Watching someone process grief so raw makes you feel like you're intruding into their most private moments. I didn't even know how to feel. On the one hand, he's just lost his wife. On the other hand, it seems as though his son has made it. There were no words to express what I felt, even as an outside witness. No emotion made sense in that incredibly heavy moment. I spent the next 4 days, nearly 24 hours a day, by my friend's side. We sat in the NICU right here in the hospital, next to what he had left of his life before it had all changed in an instant. It was heart-wrenching watching this father desperately try to connect with his son. It was eventually discovered that the baby had been without oxygen for too long during his mother's death, and although his little body was functioning, he had no brain activity. He passed away 4 days after his mother. My friend lost his entire world in 96 hours. Even saying it is shocking to recall. From visiting hell on earth to a glimmer of heaven to again going through the hell of losing his firstborn son. All of it gone. And God asked my friend, "Will you trust me?" What did it mean for my friend to trust God in the midst of intense suffering? In his story, a lot of people heard about it and asked, why? Why would God allow this to happen to someone? Could my friend have prayed or done anything to prevent it? Could he have trusted God more? Could he have prayed more or read the Bible more? The answer is, of course, no. What about the fervent prayers we prayed that night in the ED room while waiting for the news, my wife and I? Did we not pray enough or write enough? Absolutely not. Because while those actions are necessary to developing, strengthening, and furthering our relationship with God, they do not define what it means to trust him. In the midst of the experience, what continually ran through my mind was, why not me? Why did I have a healthy baby girl and a wife who was alive? And God simply asked, "Casey, will you trust me?" I'm happy to report that although my friend went through more than anyone ever should have to go through, just 2 weeks ago, he remarried. I was in his wedding, as was my daughter, and became the stepdad to 3 beautiful boys. God provided a ram to Abraham to prevent him from having to give up his son, and God provided a perfect wife and 3 amazing boys to my buddy. But I know it doesn't always turn out that way, right? The story doesn't always end in a happy ending. Your story may not have a happy ending. I know there are some of you who haven't received your ram. And there are stories out there where it seems God doesn't provide a ram to save you from giving up what you feel you've been promised. In fact, there are many of you right now who are not in a happy ending scenario. And yet, he is here, still asking, will you trust me, even without a happy ending? So, what does it mean to trust God? Especially in the midst of a situation where you question your very purpose, identity, or entire life as you know it, where you've lost everything and it seems as though the promises God has made you feel empty and untrue. What then? For my friend, despite facing more heartache than any one of us may ever feel, he trusted that he could find joy again in this life. The fact that he remarried after experiencing loss beyond anything most of us can fathom is a testament to trust. A distrust of God would be going through all of what my friend went through and then saying, I will never love again, because death is stronger than love. And with Abraham, after the pain and suffering of not having a child, Isaac finally arriving and fulfilling Abraham's greatest desire, and then God saying, but will you trust me if I take him from you? Abraham's response is a simple yes. A distrust by Abraham would have been him being unwilling to give his greatest gift. So let's define what it means to trust God. Charles Naylor, in his devotional Heart Talks, puts it beautifully like this. Trust does not mean carelessness or indifference. Just to let things go and say, oh, I guess it'll come out all right, is not trusting. Just drifting heedlessly with the tide is not trust. Neglect is not trust. Trust is something positive. It is a real something, not a mere happen so or maybe so. It is a definite attitude of soul and mind, a realization of our own need and of God's sufficiency. It is the reaching out and anchoring ourselves in God. Trust does not mean shutting our eyes to the facts. There is no such thing as blind faith. Trust looks at things as they are. It sees the dangers that threaten and assesses them at their true value. It sees Him greater than the needs or the dangers or the difficulties. It looks beyond and sees God, its all-sufficient help, and it does not shrink before them. In our two stories of Abraham and my friend, trust is the ability to be in the midst of losing it all and believing that it is not the end of the story. To be in the midst of suffering and be willing to step out again and expose yourself to the potential of additional suffering because love is worth it. Love is stronger than death. Abraham's relationship with God taught him to rely completely on God. Abraham did not serve God for what he would receive from him. He served God because of who he learned that God was. My friend learned this through his terrible ordeal to trust this very same God. We've spent this quarter talking about Abraham listening to God, which honestly, at times, he didn't, just like us. But God always listened to Abraham and continues to intently listening to us, asking, will you trust me? Is love, a fullness of life with a chance of reoccurring pain, worth it? Yes, it is. I encourage you to step out in faith in the God who says, no, I do not want you to kill your son, your daughter, yourself. I have so much more in store for you. Step out with me on this journey of life and know with certainty that I am God and you are not alone. So, how do you respond today? What is your answer? Even if you're not ready to answer, maybe you can focus on the idea that God is listening to you. God is walking beside you, offering his trust to you whenever you are willing to accept it. The only thing left to touch on is, how do you get to the place where you can wholly trust this God? I believe it is the same for how you learn to trust those around you. You must spend time with them, and in turn, you must spend time with him. Quality time, time in his word, time in conversation, and taking time to listen and not just talk and share. Be present with him in the beauty of his created nature, like on a pause excursion on Saturday this weekend. Be present with him in community, with a community who is continually pressing to be closer to him. But spend time, just as you would with a friend, until you feel comfortable trusting them with him. Try him and let him prove that he is who he says he is, the God of Abraham and the God of you and me today. As we wrap up this quarter and we wrap up this year, not school year, sorry y'all, year, calendar year, at times being unsure of who we can trust, with all the noise around you, may I invite you to take this upcoming holiday season to really get to know him, to sit in the stillness and share with him, to read his word, his life-altering stories, and listen to him. Discover his promises and allow them to open your heart and to trust in him. Look back and see how he has blessed and kept his promises before, and pour your time into him to get to the place where you can say, yes, I will trust you, Lord. Please bow your heads with me. God, I thank you for this morning. I thank you for this challenge to trust you. And I thank you for every individual heart and soul and mind in this space. May you continue to reach out and let it be known through people, through your word, and through experiences of how deeply you care for us and love us. May today be a day where we can get to the place where we will say, yes, Lord, we trust you. We ask all these things in your precious name. Amen.